My mother mocked me when I threatened to move out. "You'll never dare." I just smiled and disappeared in the night. A week later, she posted calling me an ungrateful child, but my phone was flooded with messages begging for money. Living at home at 23 was never part of my plan. Whenever I looked back at myself a few years ago, I always imagined a young, independent man with a stable job and a small apartment downtown. But life rarely goes according to plan, and for various reasons, mostly financial, I was still living in the house where I grew up. However, this isn't a story about a 23-year-old freeloader. I contributed my fair share. Not only did I pay rent regularly each month, but I also covered the electric bill and even my mother's phone plan. My mother, who raised 3 children on her own after my father decided family responsibilities weren't for him, frequently expressed gratitude for my contributions. At least at first. I had transformed my small room into a mini studio, with professional lighting, microphones, and a powerful computer for my freelance content creation work. It took nearly 2 years of overtime at a local convenience store to save enough for the equipment, but I finally built a workspace I was truly proud of. The space was small but efficient, and I really felt like I was inching toward my goals. "You know," my mother said to me one evening after seeing me complete a major project, "I'm really impressed with what you're doing. Who would have thought my little boy would build an online career right in our own home?" I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. Compliments from Mom were rare, and I treasured them more than gold. Everything seemed fine with our living arrangement. I had my own space, got to enjoy home-cooked meals, and could focus on building my career without worrying too much about the high cost of living. My siblings, my 15-year-old brother and 15-year-old sister, twins, generally respected my space, though they were occasionally mischievous and annoying like any teenagers. Things were going well until that fateful day when my mother announced at dinner that Kelly, her best friend, would be moving in with us, along with her 2 children. "It's just temporary," my mother reassured when she saw my concerned expression. "She's going through a rough divorce, and her husband is a real jerk." I swallowed, trying not to show my discomfort. "Where will they stay? Our house isn't that big." "They'll sleep in the living room," my mother answered, stroking my hair as if I were still a child. "Just for a few weeks until she finds a new place. You're a good person, aren't you?" I nodded, though feeling a vague anxiety. My mother's few weeks usually stretched much longer. But I told myself it would be fine. I could endure a bit of inconvenience if it meant helping someone in need. Kelly and her children moved in the next day. The kids, a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl, were as noisy and energetic as you might imagine. I could hear shrill laughter and the sound of running feet throughout the house, but I tried not to let it bother me. I closed my door, put on noise-canceling headphones, and focused on my work. For the first few days, things seemed okay. Kelly kept the kids busy during my working hours, and although the living room had transformed into a mini refugee camp with blankets and their personal belongings scattered everywhere, we managed. I even invited the kids into my room once to show them the animation videos I was making, and they seemed genuinely impressed. "Wow, you make these?" the 7-year-old, Jake, asked with wide eyes. "Sure do," I replied, unable to suppress a bit of pride. "This is my job." "That's so cool." His sister, Lily, exclaimed. "You're like a real YouTuber." I laughed and thanked them but gently guided them out of the room afterward. Work was waiting, and I didn't want them touching my equipment. That was normal, right? My equipment wasn't just expensive, it was my livelihood. But everything changed completely about a week later. I had been out for a few hours shopping for essentials and meeting a potential client at the local cafe. When I returned, I immediately noticed something was wrong. My bedroom door was open, and I could hear children laughing inside. My heart beat faster as I pushed the door wider. Unable to believe my eyes, I stood frozen at the threshold, staring at the chaos unfolding in my room. Jake was sitting at my desk, playing with my computer, the computer I used to edit videos and design graphics. Lily was jumping on my bed, surrounded by her toys scattered everywhere. And my equipment, expensive microphone, professional lighting, and camera, had been pushed into a corner of the room like worthless items. "What the hell is going on here?" I shouted, my voice higher and louder than I intended. Anger, panic, and confusion had overtaken my reason. Jake jumped from my chair, and Lily stopped jumping immediately. Both children looked at me with frightened eyes. "We're sorry," Jake stammered, but before he could say more, my mother and Kelly appeared at the doorway. "What's going on?" my mother asked, her voice hard. "Why are you yelling at the children like that?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I pointed to the messy room, the disturbed equipment, and the children's toys scattered everywhere. "Why are they in my room?" And why is my equipment moved? My mother sighed as if I were overreacting. Calm down, it's not a big deal. The kids needed more space, and your room is the largest. That's fair. Fair? I repeated, stunned. I'm paying rent for this room. I wasn't even consulted about this. Kelly stepped forward, her expression a mix of apology and annoyance. We were going to tell you when you got home. We just thought the living room was too cramped for all three of us, and this was the best solution. The best solution for whom? I countered, trying to control my voice. I need this room for work. This isn't just where I sleep, it's my studio, where I make my living. You're being selfish, my mother said, crossing her arms. The children need to be comfortable. What about me? I asked, feeling a pang in my chest. Doesn't my comfort matter? They're just kids, my mother replied, her eyes narrowing. And they want to play on your computer. Don't make such a fuss. I shook my head vigorously. No way. My equipment is worth thousands of dollars. If anything happens to it, I'm in serious trouble. I can't let the kids play with it. Oh, come on, Kelly interjected, they're just curious. You can't blame them. Maybe if you weren't so uptight, they'd listen to you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Uptight? Just because I wanted to protect equipment I had worked hard to buy, equipment I needed to make a living? Who in this situation wouldn't react the same way I did? Kids, get out, I said to the children, trying to keep my voice from being too harsh. My mom and I need to talk for a minute. The children hurried out of the room, closing the door behind them. I turned to my mother, trying my best to stay calm. Mom, I understand that Kelly and her kids are going through a tough time, but this room is where I work. I pay rent for it. I can't have the kids playing with my equipment, it's my livelihood. My mother rolled her eyes. You're being so dramatic. It's just a computer and camera. A computer and camera worth over $3,000, I emphasized, feeling my anger rise. I worked for a year to buy it. If it breaks, I lose my income. The kids will be careful, Kelly said, her face now a mask of fake patience. They're not monsters. I'm not saying they're monsters, I replied, but they are children. Children accidentally break things. That's normal. I don't blame them for that, but I also can't let them access my equipment. So what do you propose? My mother asked, her voice challenging. They have to stay somewhere, and your room is the best option. Why not Jared's or Lisa's room? I asked, referring to my twin brother and sister. Lisa's room is almost as big as mine. Lisa's room is full of her stuff, my mother countered, and Jared's room is too small. Besides, your room has all those cool things, and the kids like it better. I stood there, stunned by the absurdity of the situation. My room was being commandeered not because it was the only option but because it was the easiest one. Because it was cooler. Because I, the oldest son who contributed financially, was the easiest to bully. I don't accept this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I pay rent for this room, and I need it for work. If Kelly and the kids need more space, I understand, but it can't be my room. This is my house, my mother replied, her voice cold, and I decide what happens in it. Those words stabbed me like a knife. I was a financial contributor, an official tenant, but suddenly I had no say in this. I was just the child who had to obey her, regardless of the fact that I was 23 and paying to live there. If I don't have a say in what happens to my room, I said slowly, then maybe I shouldn't be paying rent anymore. My mother laughed mockingly. Don't threaten me. Where would you go? You don't have enough money to move out. Is that so? I replied. I guess we'll have to see. The following days in the house turned into a cold zone of tension. I avoided my mother and Kelly as much as possible, only returning home to sleep. I had taken some essential equipment and spent most of my working time at the local cafe, though that significantly limited what I could do. My studio equipment remained crammed into a corner of the room, now Kelly and the kids' room. I wasn't even allowed to enter without permission, which I found incredibly hard to believe. Each time I needed to grab something more, I had to knock on the door like a visitor in my own home. I tried once more to talk to my mother one evening when Kelly had put the kids to bed early. I found her in the kitchen, washing dishes from dinner. Mom, I began, keeping my voice as gentle as possible, we need to talk about my room situation. She sighed, putting down a plate. You're still not over this? It's affecting my work, I explained. I can't work efficiently without my equipment. It's affecting my income. You still have your laptop, she replied dismissively. You can work anywhere. Not with the kind of work I do, I tried to explain. I need my microphone, lights, and camera. Without them, I can't create quality content. She shrugged. It's just temporary. When Kelly finds a new place, you'll get your room back. How long will that take? I asked. A week? A month? Half a year? She looked at me with a hard stare. As long as it takes. You don't put a timeline on someone else's hardship. I felt disappointment rising within me. Mom, I've tried to be patient and understanding, but this is my life, my future. I've contributed to this house, but I'm not being respected. I wasn't asked. I'm not even allowed into my own room. You're overreacting, she countered, washing her hands under the faucet. This is my house, and I decide what happens in it. If you don't like it, the door is right there. That was the moment I realized things wouldn't change. My mother had decided that Kelly and her kids' needs were more important than mine, even though I was the one financially contributing to the family. In her eyes, I was still just a child who had to obey her, not an independent adult with the right to be respected. That night, lying on the couch in the living room where I'd been sleeping since being evicted from my room, I decided it was time to act. I had no other choice. I needed respect, and if I couldn't get it here, I would have to find it elsewhere. The next morning, I started looking for rooms to rent. I sat in my favorite cafe for hours, scrolling through listings, messaging landlords, and calculating my budget. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew I could make it work if I cut unnecessary expenses. And above all, I would have my space back, my ability to work, and my dignity. It took a week to find a suitable place, a small room in an old apartment building, but it was clean, affordable, and most importantly, it would be mine. The landlady, an older woman named Mrs. Patel, seemed to like me right from our first meeting. You seem like a serious young man, she said as we signed the lease. I appreciate that. Too many young people these days just want a party. I smiled, feeling like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Thank you, Mrs. Patel. I promise I'll be a good tenant. Now came the hard part, telling my family I was moving out. Part of me wanted to simply disappear, to move out without telling anyone, but I knew that was childish. I needed to face my mother one last time. I chose an evening when Kelly had put the kids to bed early, and we were all home. My mother was watching TV in the living room, her shadow moving on the wall in the pale blue light from the screen. Mom, I said, sitting down beside her. We need to talk. She glanced at me, weariness evident on her face. What is it? I found a place to rent, I said straightforwardly. I'm moving out tomorrow. My mother blinked, her expression changing from surprise to disbelief. You're lying. No, I'm not, I replied. I've signed a lease. I'll be moving my stuff out in the morning. She laughed mockingly, turning off the TV to focus on me. You're really doing this? You're leaving over a small disagreement? This isn't a small disagreement, I countered, trying to stay calm. You took away my room, where I work and live, without consulting me. When I told you I wasn't comfortable with it, you said my feelings didn't matter. That's not a small disagreement, it's an issue of respect. My mother sat up straight, her face hardening. You know I need your rent money to pay the bills. If you leave, how can I maintain this house? That's not my problem anymore, I said, feeling a bit of guilt creeping in, but I pushed it aside. You made it clear that this is your house, your rules. I have no say in decisions that affect me. So, I don't need to be here. So you'll abandon us? She said, her voice accusatory. After all I've done for you? You could ask Kelly to pay rent, I suggested. Or her husband. They're still married, right? Or you could rent out my room, the room you decided isn't mine anymore. My mother glared at me, anger and astonishment clear on her face. You're really going to do this? You're going to leave your family over a room? No, Mom, I answered, feeling a strange peace wash over me now that I'd made my decision. I'm leaving because I'm no longer respected. I contribute here, I pay, but I'm treated like a child who has to put up with anything without having a voice. She didn't respond immediately, just looked at me with a hard stare. After a long pause, she finally said, You'll never dare do it. This is just an act to get attention. I just smiled, rising from my seat. I'll have my friend over at 9 a.m. tomorrow. They'll help me move. Don't think you can come back when things get tough. She called after me as I left the room. I know you can't take care of yourself. I didn't answer, just continued up the stairs and started packing my remaining personal belongings in the living room. Tomorrow morning, I would retrieve my equipment from my old room, regardless of whether Kelly or my mother objected. That night, as I lay on the sofa for the last time, I heard whispers from the kitchen. Curious, I quietly left the blanket and moved closer to listen. I can't believe he's actually going to do this, Kelly's voice. He doesn't even understand how hard this is for us. He's just a spoiled brat. He's always been stubborn, my mother agreed, her voice full of disappointment. He'll get over it. He can't take care of himself. I backed away, feeling a pang in my chest. That's how they saw me, a selfish child, more a burden than a contributor. I was just a paycheck to my mother and an obstacle to Kelly and her children. They didn't care about me or my needs. In their eyes, I was just a joke. As I returned to the sofa, I felt a new anger fueling my determination. I would prove them wrong. I would prove that I wasn't just a stubborn child. I would be independent and successful, and they would regret treating me this way. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I had arranged for 2 friends to come help me move at 9 a.m., but I wanted to get my equipment out of my old room before Kelly and the kids woke up. I didn't want another confrontation. I gently knocked on my room door, hoping not to wake anyone. When there was no answer, I quietly opened the door and stepped in. The room had been completely transformed. Toys and clothes scattered everywhere, my bed buried under a pile of pink blankets and stuffed animals, and my desk covered with coloring books and markers. My equipment, as expected, was still crammed into the corner, dusty. I quickly and quietly began packing my equipment, trying not to make loud noises. I was almost finished when I heard a sound behind me. "What are you doing?" Kelly's voice, sharp as a razor. I turned to see her standing at the door with an angry expression. "I'm getting my stuff," I answered simply. "I'm moving out today." "You can't just barge in here and start taking things," she objected. "This is our room now." I stood up straight, remaining calm but firm. "This is my equipment, Kelly. I paid for it, and I need it for work. I'm taking it back." "You're being ridiculous," she spat, hands on her hips. "You're breaking your mother's heart over some stupid equipment." "This isn't about the equipment," I said, continuing to pack. "This is about respect. I've been treated like a second-class citizen in my own home, and I'm tired of it." "You're so selfish," she said, shaking her head in disgust. "This is a hard time for us, and you're making it worse." "I'm sorry about your situation," I said sincerely, "but I have my life too. I need to do what's right for myself." Just then, one of my friends called me, letting me know they had arrived. I told them I'd be right down and returned to packing, deliberately ignoring Kelly standing at the door with her angry expression. "You'll regret this," she said as I passed by her with my box of equipment. "You have no idea how hard the real world is." I didn't respond, just continued down the stairs. That wasn't an argument I wanted to engage in, and the last thing I needed was a big fight before leaving. My 2 friends, Mike and Sarah, had arrived with a small rental truck. They were ready to help me move, and with their help, we quickly loaded my belongings. Mike had even brought his camera, recording the whole process in case someone tried to interfere. "You're doing the right thing, man," Mike said as we carried the last box to the truck. "Nobody deserves to be treated like that, especially when you're financially contributing." I nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and excitement. "I know. I just wish it didn't have to end this way." When we were ready to leave, my mother finally appeared at the front door. She looked tired and angry, but there was also a bit of shock in her eyes, as if she didn't really believe I was leaving until she saw the truck full of my belongings. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Yes, Mom," I replied, closing the back of the truck. "I told you I was moving out." "You can't take care of yourself," she said, but this was no longer a criticism, it was almost a plea. "You'll be back within a month." "I don't think so," I said, climbing into the truck. "Goodbye, Mom." As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror to see my mother still standing at the entrance, looking small and lonely. Part of me wanted to tell Mike to turn the truck around, to try to fix things one more time. But the rest of me knew there was nothing to fix. My mother had made her choice, and now I was making mine. My new room wasn't luxurious. It was considerably smaller than my old room, and the old building had some issues: inconsistent hot water, an outdated heating system, and walls so thin I could hear the neighbors' conversations. But it was mine, and that made it perfect in its own way. I set up my studio in the corner, arranging everything exactly how I liked it. The lighting wasn't as ideal as in my old room, but I worked with it, using cheap reflectors to create the effects I needed. After a few days of experimentation, I had a setup that worked fairly well, and I could get back to my work. My mother left a barrage of messages on my phone in the first few days after I moved out. At first, they were full of anger, accusing me of being selfish, ungrateful, and childish. According to her, I had abandoned the family and left her to deal with the bills alone. "You've always been this selfish," one message read. "I can't believe you're doing this to me after all I've done for you." I didn't respond. I had said everything I needed to say, and I knew that anything I said now would only make the situation worse. Instead, I focused on stabilizing my new life and working hard to catch up on projects I'd fallen behind on. After a few days, the messages began to change. My mother was no longer angry but started to feel guilty, asking when I would visit, saying she missed me. I still didn't respond. I needed time and space to think, to decide what I wanted my relationship with my mother to be like in the future. About a week after I moved out, my sister called me. "Big brother," she said when I picked up, "Mom is really sad. She says you're not paying rent this month, and now she's worried about the bills." "I don't live there anymore," I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. "Why would I pay rent for a place I don't live in?" "But you know she can't manage without you," my sister argued. "You've always helped. Why stop now?" "Because she didn't respect me," I said bluntly. "She took away my room, locked me out, and treated me like I didn't matter. I can't continue to be used." "It's not that simple," my sister sighed. "Kelly is going through a hard time, and Mom is just trying to help." "I understand that," I replied, "but why does helping Kelly mean sacrificing me? I paid rent for that room. I had every right to keep it." My sister was silent for a moment. "She didn't mean to hurt you," she finally said. "She just didn't think about it." "And that's exactly the problem," I said. "She didn't think about me or my feelings. She just saw me as a source of income, not a person with needs and rights of my own." We talked for a while longer, mostly about her school and what was happening with the twins. It seemed things at home were tense since I left, not only because of financial issues but also because my mother was constantly irritable. "She misses you," my sister said before we ended the call. "She's just too proud to admit it." "I miss her too," I admitted, "but I can't go back to the old conditions. I need to be respected." After the first week, the messages from my mother began to dwindle. I thought she had realized that I wouldn't budge. I started to feel a bit of relief, hoping that perhaps we could gradually figure out a new way to interact when things settled down. And then the bombshell hit. One morning, I woke up to a message from my cousin Andy, whom I hadn't spoken to in a long time. "Hey, I heard about everything with your mom. Are you okay?" Confused, I asked him what he was talking about. That's when he sent me a screenshot of a Facebook post my mother had made, a long, emotional post about how her eldest son had abandoned the family in tough times, refusing to pay rent and leaving her struggling with bills. "I raised my son, gave him a home, and this is how he repays me," she wrote. "He took advantage of my kindness for years, and now when I need him most, he's abandoned me. I just don't know what to do. The bills are piling up, and I can't do this on my own." Of course, she omitted the part where she gave away my room without consulting me, the part where she refused to let me into my own room, and the part where she treated me like a burden despite my financial contributions. In her post, I was the villain, the ungrateful child abandoning his poor, helpless old mother. I felt a wave of anger rising within me. She had not only insulted me in private but had taken the issue public, trying to shame me in front of friends and family. It was a low blow, designed to make me feel bad and perhaps make me come back as her cash cow. I considered responding, explaining my side of the story. But I knew that would only lead to a public battle that neither of us would truly win. Instead, I decided to keep silent. I knew the truth, and so did the people who really mattered in my life, like Mike, Sarah, and a few other close friends. "Thanks for letting me know," I replied to Andy. "But I won't be engaging in this game. If my mother wants to talk to me, she can call me directly." Andy seemed to understand. He didn't press further, just offered to grab a beer if I needed to talk. In the following days, my phone began to flood with messages, not just from my mother but from other family members, family friends, and even a few acquaintances I'd barely spoken to in years. Most were taking my mother's side, saying I needed to think about her and the family first, that I was acting selfishly and heartlessly. But then a strange thing started to happen. The messages from my mother began to change in tone. No longer angry or accusatory, they now became pleading. "Could you at least help me with the electric bill this month? I'm really struggling. I need to pay a parking ticket. Could you please send me $75? I'm late on rent. The landlord is threatening to evict us. Please help me. I need $800 urgently." The requested amounts kept increasing, as did the urgency in the messages. At first, I felt guilty and almost wanted to send the money. I knew how much my mother earned, and I knew what her bills were. Losing my contribution would make her budget tight indeed, but not the crisis she was describing. That made me wonder, was this manipulation? A way to make me feel bad and return to my old position as a payer without a voice? I decided to check with my brother, whom I trusted to tell the truth. Jared, I asked when I called him, how bad are things really at home? Mom's saying she's about to be evicted. My brother snorted. No way. We're not rich, but Mom's still paying the rent. She picked up extra shifts at the restaurant, and Kelly has started contributing a bit. It's not ideal, but we're managing. What about the other bills? Utilities, car? I asked. Everything's being paid on time, my brother confirmed. Really, we're fine. Mom just doesn't like having to stretch a bit more. I felt a strange sense of relief and betrayal. Relief because my family wasn't really in financial danger, and betrayal because my mother had lied to try to pull me back in. She had deliberately made me feel guilty, using our relationship as a tool to extract money from me. Thanks for being honest, I said, trying not to let anger cloud my judgment. I just needed to know how things really are. No problem, Jared said. But listen, big bro, come visit us. We miss you. I promised to make time to see my siblings, but I knew I wouldn't be moving back. I had to leave to find respect, and I couldn't return to a place where I was treated like an ATM rather than a person. Weeks passed, and life began to stabilize. I had regained momentum in my work, taking on new projects and even finding some new clients through local social media groups. My studio setup was working well, and I'd even found some creative solutions for the room's lighting issues, producing content I was genuinely proud of. Messages from my mother continued to arrive, though less frequently and less urgently. After the "we're about to be evicted" script failed, she switched to other tactics, reminding me of upcoming holidays, upcoming birthdays, and how much my siblings missed me. I responded to a few messages related to my siblings but kept my distance from my mother. One day, about 2 months after I moved out, I had an unexpected encounter. I was working at the local cafe, a habit I'd maintained even though it was no longer necessary because I enjoyed the change of scenery, when I heard a familiar voice. "Hello, what are you doing here?" I looked up to find Kelly standing in front of me, her eyes wide with surprise. She looked more tired than I remembered, with lines around her eyes I didn't recall seeing before. "I'm working," I said simply, not sure how to handle this situation. She stood there for a moment, as if considering something, then sat down in the chair opposite me without being invited. "Listen, I think we should talk." I closed my laptop, bracing for a confrontation, but the next thing Kelly said caught me by surprise. "I want to apologize," she said, looking at her coffee cup instead of my eyes. "I didn't treat you fairly. You were paying rent for that room, and we shouldn't have just taken it." I didn't know what to say. Of all the possible scenarios, an apology from Kelly was the last thing I expected. "I was going through a hard time," she continued, "but that doesn't mean I had the right to treat you that way. I just wanted you to know that I recognize my mistake." Thanks," I said, still shocked. "That means something. Actually, I think that's why your mother is acting the way she is," she added. "She feels guilty. She knows we didn't treat you fairly, but she's too proud to admit it." I frowned. Then why is she still spreading misinformation about me to family and friends? Why is she trying to lure me back with stories of financial crisis? Kelly sighed. "I can't tell you why she does what she does. But I think she's struggling with losing control. You stepped out and became independent, and she doesn't know how to deal with that." "That's not a reason to lie about me," I said. "I know," she admitted. "I'm not excusing her. I just wanted you to know that not all of us think you're wrong. And hey, I've started looking for a place of my own. I've been picking up extra shifts at the store, and I'm saving. We won't be there forever." "That's good," I said, feeling a bit of relief. "You and the kids weren't the real problem. It was how people reacted to the situation." Kelly nodded, then stood up. "Anyway, I just wanted to say that. I hope things are going well for you. You look happier." After she left, I sat there for a while, trying to process what had just happened. Was Kelly's apology genuine? Or was it just another attempt to pull me back in? I couldn't be sure, but I had to admit it made me feel a bit better. At least someone had acknowledged that the way they treated me was wrong. Another month passed, and although messages from my mother continued, I had learned to live with them. I had created a healthy distance, only responding when it concerned my siblings or when I felt mentally strong. I even met with my siblings a few times, taking them out to dinner or to the movies, always arranging to meet at a neutral location to avoid having to return to the old house. I had stabilized my new life and was beginning to see that I could really take care of myself. My studio was fully operational, I had a steady client list, and even had a few fellow content creators I met with regularly to share ideas and advice. I wasn't rich, but I was improving, and honestly, I was proud of myself. One day, I received an unexpected message from my mother, not a request for money or an expression of disappointment, but an invitation. "Son, I hope you're doing well. Our family is having a dinner on Sunday. It would be nice if you could come. Jared and Lisa really want to see you, and so do I." I thought about it all day. Was this a path to reconciliation? Or just a way to pull me back into the family orbit? From my encounter with Kelly, I knew she was in the process of moving out, having found a small apartment that she and the kids would be moving to within a few weeks. Perhaps this was an opportunity to start fresh with my mother. After careful consideration, I decided to accept the invitation, but with safeguards. I wouldn't go alone. I would invite Mike to come with me for additional moral support and a buffer against any manipulation. And I would set clear boundaries with my mother before arriving. No requests for money, no accusations, no attempts to convince me to move back home. "I'll come," I replied to her message, "but I'll be bringing a friend, and I expect a pleasant evening without arguments." "All right, son," she replied almost immediately. "I'm looking forward to seeing you." On Sunday, Mike and I arrived at my old house with a bottle of wine and a cautious mood. I wasn't sure what awaited me, but I had mentally prepared for any scenario. But when the door opened, it wasn't my mother who greeted us but Lisa. "Big brother," my sister exclaimed, hugging me tight. "I'm so glad you came." Inside, the house was warm and smelled of good food. Jared was setting the table, and my mother was in the kitchen, supervising something on the stove. When she saw me, there was a moment of hesitation, then she smiled, not the fake smile I had become familiar with over the years, but a genuine one, though somewhat shy. "Son," she said, her voice softer than I had heard in a long time. "I'm so glad you came." I introduced Mike to everyone, and after a few initial awkward minutes, the atmosphere began to relax. Kelly and her children weren't present. According to Lisa, they were staying at Kelly's mother's until their new apartment was ready in a few days. Throughout dinner, we kept the conversation light, mostly focusing on my siblings and their school. No one mentioned me moving out, my mother's Facebook posts, or the money-begging messages. It was as if we were carefully walking on thin ice, with no one wanting to break the fragile surface. But after dinner, when Mike and Jared were helping clean up and Lisa was making coffee, my mother pulled me aside. "Son," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." I tensed, waiting for a request for money or complaints about bills. "I'm sorry," she said instead, completely surprising me. "Not just about your room, but about how I've treated you for a long time. I've depended on you too much and didn't give you the respect you deserved. You were right to leave." I felt like I had stepped into an alternate reality. My mother, who I couldn't remember last apologizing to me for anything, was admitting she had been wrong. "I miss you," she continued. "But I know I can't ask you to come back after how I treated you. I just hope that someday you can forgive me, and maybe we can start building a better relationship." I didn't know what to say. After all the days I had imagined this confrontation, I had never considered the possibility that my mother might genuinely regret her actions. "I need time," I finally said. "I can't promise anything right now, but I appreciate your apology." She nodded, her eyes wet. "I understand. Just know that the door is always open to you, not for you to move back home, but to be part of the family on your terms." It's been nearly 6 months since I moved out of my mother's house, and life has changed in ways I never expected. My work is thriving, with a stable client list and even a few collaborative projects with other content creators. I've moved to a slightly larger apartment, still modest but with better space for my studio. My relationship with my family has also changed. I see my siblings regularly, and we've developed a stronger relationship than we ever had when I lived at home. With my mother, things are still complicated. We're slowly rebuilding a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than dependency. She no longer asks me for money, and I feel, for the first time in years, that she's actually listening to me when I speak. Kelly and her children have moved into their own apartment, which I know from conversations with Jared. My mother has reclaimed my old desk and ended up with a less crowded house, resulting in less stress for everyone. Sometimes I still think about the days when I had to sleep on the couch, manipulated and bullied in my own home. I remember the feeling of having to ask permission to enter my own room, seeing my equipment pushed into a corner like worthless items. And I remember my mother's mocking laugh when she said, "You'll never dare do it. You can't take care of yourself." But those are memories, not my current reality. I've proven that I can stand on my own, that I have value and deserve respect. And although the path hasn't always been easy, I don't regret walking out that door 6 months ago. Sometimes, you have to leave to find your true worth. Sometimes, you have to give up comfort to find respect. And sometimes, you have to have the courage to say enough for those around you to finally realize how serious you are. As I look around my small but tidy apartment, with my studio equipment arranged exactly how I want it, with space to breathe and think and create, I know I did the right thing. I'm no longer the overlooked eldest child. I'm a grown man standing on his own feet, and no one can take that away from me.